Hi everyone, welcome to today's Boardroom. I'm Amy McLeod from HR Recruit. I think some of you know me already. And we've got Lynda Bailey joining us today from Talking Menopause. Lynda's going to kindly go through some slides and some information around menopause. And then we'll do a Q&A session at the end. So if you do have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat box and we'll do our best to work through them at the end. So I'll pass over to you, Lynda.
Thank you very much, Amy, and good afternoon to everybody. So I am just going to put the presentation up, so just bear with me for 2 seconds whilst I get that going. Right. Okay, so I'm hoping everybody can see that. And I was just saying to Amy, yesterday I did a presentation like this, and in the chat function, because I'm very easily distracted, one of the participants said they were listening to it in the dentist chair. I thought, wow. And I said, the dentist really enjoyed it too. So, so now I know that menopause, talking about menopause can be a distraction for sitting in the dentist chair. So how about that? So that quite amused me. So really great to be here today. What I thought I would like to do is to just share why I do what I do, because we believe at Talking Menopause that stories are important and stories help to tell what's going on, especially around menopause, because everybody's different. Everybody's got a slightly different story about it. So I came to menopause quite a few years ago now, and at the time I started to experience symptoms. I was a serving police inspector in West Midlands Police. I'd worked for the organisation for over 20 years, and started having symptoms which I had no idea belonged to menopause, had no idea that I was actually old enough to be going through menopause, and certainly had no idea that some of these symptoms were going to have this huge impact on me as an individual. So my very first symptoms were heart palpitations, and they are a symptom of menopause, but I didn't know that. And I truly believe that due to my lifestyle and working shifts and being quite a stressful job, that was what was causing these heart palpitations. And as a result, went to see a cardiologist who said, no, your heart's fine, nothing wrong with it. What he did say was, I see lots of women of your age. Oh, okay. And in fact, my wife talks about lots of the symptoms that you're actually talking about, but at no point did he ever mention menopause to me. The doctor had never mentioned menopause to me. And so I left there still having heart palpitations and still not knowing what was wrong with me. What I also had was this huge increased levels of anxiety, which I'd never really experienced before. And then I started to get real issues around cognitive function. And the bottom line and the end result was I ended up having 3 months off work due to my menopausal symptoms, but at the time I didn't know that's what it was for. And that was a huge shock to me, and a huge shock in the fact that I was always a high performing, high functioning individual. And I don't say that in any kind of show off kind of way, because I don't mean that. But what I do mean is that I was able to deal with things. I was able to get on with things. And all of a sudden I changed into somebody who couldn't do some of those things. And for me as an individual, it was a real challenge. And what I also lost was my zest and appetite for life, if you like. Because everything, I describe it as being a flat line. Everything just felt like a flat line. All the joy, all the fun, everything had been sucked out of everything. And as a result of which, I lost my confidence and self-esteem, which is why I couldn't go to work. So I describe it as being a person who initially, as a police officer, going and really dealing with things up front, but then actually not even being able to get behind, getting out my front door. And the GP, my doctor, prescribed me antidepressants, but I wasn't depressed. And antidepressants have a function, but for me, that wasn't, and I didn't actually take those antidepressants. What I did start to do was start to do some research and start to understand what was going on, and came to the conclusion that what I was experiencing, all these symptoms, and you can see on my menopause infographic behind me, there are quite a number of symptoms of menopause. And so I started to understand what was actually happening to me. And as a result of that, I started to research what I could do to help and support myself going through this menopausal journey. As a result of which, I met a doctor called Dr. Louise Newson, who those of you who have done any research about menopause probably will know about her, as she's one of the leading UK doctors in the country. And she came into West Midlands Police to have a look at the work that we were doing to support menopause in the workplace. Because when I went back into the workplace, what I found that in an organisation of over 11,000 people and a demographic of over 35% female, nobody was talking about menopause. But I also knew that I wasn't the only person in that organisation experiencing these kind of symptoms. So as a result of which, I started to do quite a bit of work around menopause and started to raise awareness through a menopause support group and through connections with our women's network, and also diversity and inclusion, and also HR manager as well. So started to get that together. So when I left West Midlands Police, I set up this company with Sarah, Talking Menopause, and that's what we do. And so for the last 3.5 years, we have been going into organisations talking about menopause, raising awareness of menopause in the workplace, because so many organisations don't take menopause seriously. There are so many individuals in the workplace who feel alone and supported through going through menopause, because the pathway for support isn't always clear, as it is with any other issues. So today I want to give you some ideas on if you aren't talking menopause in your own organisation, why we think you should be doing that, but also some of the ways that you can actually achieve that as well. So what we really want to try and do is create this environment where all employees feel comfortable talking about menopause. So it's not just the person who's experiencing the symptoms, because there is an argument to say, why should it be that person who has to create that environment? But it's also, as a manager, how do you support an individual who is going through menopause in the workplace? Do you know the support pathways for that individual? And, would you consider using reasonable adjustments? Would you consider a reasonable adjustment passport, for example? So lots of things around managers being comfortable to be able to have that conversation, but also as a colleague, how you can support somebody going through menopause as well. So, for example, if you were in a meeting with somebody who was having a memory lapse, how could you support that person whilst they're going through that memory lapse? Could you step in and help them, or how around that individual are people looking to support them, and what does that actually look like? So as I'm going through these slides, what I'd really love you to be able to do is to think about, what does menopause mean to you? So what does it mean to you as an individual? What does it mean to you within your own organisation? Is it visible in your organisation? Is it part and parcel of a normal everyday conversation that you have in the workplace? So if somebody comes to a line manager to tell them that they are pregnant, then normally a process will kick in where everybody knows what to do. We may be considering a risk assessment. We're going to look at how we're going to support that individual through that pregnancy. If somebody comes to you as a manager and talks to you about menopause, are we kickstarting the same kind of process? Are we providing that same level of support to those individuals? So that's the kind of thing that I hope you will start to think about as we're going through this process. And one of the other reasons that I ask, what does menopause mean to you? Because if we pose this question on a session that we do for menopausal employees, then we get quite a huge emotional response to that normally. And the biggest things that people tell us is that they feel alone and isolated in the workplace, even though they may be part of an organisation which is 70 to 80% female demographic, but they still feel alone within that workplace. And they don't always feel comfortable to actually go and ask for help. So as a result of that, symptoms get hidden. So people don't know. So within an organisation, for example, if you have absence management procedures, you know, is menopause included in that? Is menopause a separate category for absence management? And even when it is, there are still people who won't declare menopausal symptoms because they fear that, for example, if redundancies are coming up, they may be made redundant, or they fear that people are going to think that they're not capable of doing their jobs anymore. And so there's a real threat around them staying in the workplace. And as a result of that, quite a high percentage of individuals will leave the workplace because of menopausal symptoms. And a lot of sessions that we do, then we will have people who will tell us that they have left organisations because of their menopausal symptoms. So what we're trying to do is to prevent that from happening. Now, it might be for an individual that was the right time for them to leave that organisation, but also it does pose a question: if they had felt that they had the right support within that organisation, would they have stayed? So that's a question that we're considering with organisations. So we haven't got time to do a huge amount around menopause, so I'm just going to go through a few facts. So the biggest thing that's to understand around menopause, it is an individual experience. No two persons' menopause is going to be the same. And so this is where, certainly as managers, we really need to have that conversation about what does menopause mean to you? What is the impact of those symptoms on you as an individual? What we do know, that menopause is a huge physical, mental and psychological change process that's actually going on. And so what we need to do is understand what is actually happening, and that is key to how we're going to manage it, both individually and personally, but also how we're going to manage it in the workplace. So I've said there are 34 potential menopausal symptoms. And this is a menopause symptom infographic, which a member of the support group in West Midlands Police made for us. And we use that as a communications tool to raise awareness of menopause. And in fact, just this morning before I came on this session, somebody's reading these symptoms to me off my board because they're recognising some of the symptoms that they're experiencing themselves. So if we look at who is affected by menopause, so every single female at some point will go through menopause. And when I say female, I'm talking about people who have that biological capacity to go through menopause, and also with transgender and non-binary people can also experience menopause too. So we sometimes have this caricature almost of the only people who go through menopause are older females. And the average age for menopause in the UK is 51. However, there are people who experience menopause at an early age, a much earlier age. And I was talking to somebody this morning who had a surgical menopause at the age of 42. And so if that happens to you, you are then straight bang into this process, which can cause some of these symptoms that you're going to have. You can also experience menopause if you have treatment for some certain types of cancer as well. And for younger people who experience menopause, that can be a real, almost this double impact for them, because not only are they experiencing menopausal symptoms at this younger age, then of course they've also lost their fertility as well. So it can be quite devastating for individuals who are experiencing it at that younger age. So we are talking over 50% of the population are going to experience this, and yet it's something which is still got a little bit of taboo about it. It's something that we don't take seriously in the workplace, and it's something that we don't necessarily have conversations about. So if we think of some of the symptoms that we can experience around menopause, now most of us will have some idea of a hot flush, and we can see people sitting perhaps in meetings like this and fanning themselves, and so we know that's happening, or they're taking a jacket off because they're really hot. And so we sort of have an idea that that's one of the symptoms, but of course not everybody is going to experience hot flushes. As I've said, this is really individual. We're all going to experience it in a different kind of way. But what we found is that within the workplace, it's the cognitive challenges that individuals face which cause the most impact for people at work. So for those of you out there who has heard of the term brain fog, that's an almost encompassing title for some of the cognitive impact that menopausal symptoms can have. So for example, if you have memory lapses, so you've worked with the same person for the last 15 years and now you can't remember the name, and you're looking at the lanyard because you're trying to see what the name is, because you professionally you want to be able to understand what their name is, but then you haven't got your glasses on. But anyway, different story. So you then are perhaps making some mistakes, or you can't remember how to do certain things, or you've been doing the same tasks for a number of years, and all of a sudden, over a period of time, you can start to feel more anxious about doing those tasks. You can find that you're double checking, triple checking, making copious notes about the role that you get carried out for a long time. So you can start to see how this can then start to cause quite high levels of anxiety, because we are going through this massive change. And so when those symptoms start to manifest themselves in the workplace, how are we looking at those symptoms? So are we seeing then a person who is underperforming? So we are then going to look at how we're going to performance manage this individual. Are we looking at a person's absence or sickness record and noting that they're having a number of periods of sickness? So we're then kicking in our absence management procedures. So at this point, are we thinking that potentially it could be menopausal symptoms? Because there are quite a number of people who are currently under performance management because of menopausal symptoms. There are people who have left work willingly, but there's also people who've left work unwillingly as a result of their menopausal symptoms, because they haven't either been identified by the individual and not supported within the workplace. So the biggest thing that I would like you to remember is that every person's experience is individual. And that is the biggest thing that you can remember from this. So certainly when we're talking about line managers, we are talking about how we're going to have that conversation, how we're going to have that one-to-one. And so over the last 12 months during the pandemic, a lot of organisations have done a lot of work around health and well-being. They've done a lot of work around supporting people through mental health. Mental health, significant impact for menopause as well. So hopefully people are in that frame of mind now that we can start to help people through menopause too. So I've just put this for you to have a quick look at, because this is called the Symptom Check, and it's available to download from My Menopause Doctor, which is Dr. Louise Newson's website. And when we're looking at symptoms, what can be really helpful for the individual is to start to track their symptoms, because then that gives you an idea of which symptoms are causing you the most issues, and then you can start to look at some potential solutions for some of those symptoms. So we would always advise, certainly for the individual, that they're starting to look personally at how they can start to record those symptoms, and then how they can start to do something about it, because that is the first step in being able to manage personally your menopause symptoms. I also wanted to bring your attention to something called the Balance app, which has been downloaded around 200,000 times across the world now. It's a free download, and again, this is a way to record your menopausal symptoms. You can download a report which you can then take to your doctor. There's a huge amount of information on there, medical information around menopause. There is a network that you can talk to other people about menopause too. So again, that is a really useful tool for individuals to use to help to try and track their symptoms. The NICE guidance, which is set out for individuals to access, to consider what kind of response that they should be able to get from their doctor when they go and talk to them about menopause. Because what we found, and Louise did a survey of 3,000 individuals who had menopausal symptoms and had gone to their doctor, and 66% of those were actually prescribed antidepressants. which it is accepted that antidepressants can't necessarily help with menopausal symptoms, because they're not actually replacing the hormones that you're losing as you're going through menopause. And the reason I put that up there for you to have a look at is because what the real challenge, certainly in the workplace for a lot of individuals, is menopause isn't always easy to demonstrate to your organisation, because you can say that you're having symptoms, but because of people's lack of knowledge around sometimes the severity and the seriousness of those symptoms, then they aren't always accepted or taken seriously. So, for example, pregnancy is really easy to demonstrate, without being too basic. It's a straight yes or no whether you're pregnant or not. But the real challenge around menopause is, as individuals, we don't always first, when it starts, really understand what's happening. The workplace doesn't understand what's happening. There are challenges around GPs diagnosing whether you're menopausal or not. And so for the individual who's experienced these symptoms, it can be a real challenge to go back into the workplace, especially if they've not had the kind of response that they could expect from their GP. So again, that's something really important to acknowledge, that if we're not taking it seriously and we're not educated and we don't know about it, then that's where the challenge starts to appear in the workplace. So there is, the NICE guidance says that if you are over 45 and you are experiencing changes in your periods and symptoms, then that in itself should diagnose that you are going through menopause. But it isn't as simple as straightforward as that. And I think it's really important for the workplace to recognise these challenges that individuals are facing. So why should we care about menopause? Why are we talking about it now? And I think menopause is probably where pregnancy was quite a number of years ago, and it had an impact on people's careers, and menopause is doing the same thing now. So there is a legal reason that we want to talk about menopause, and we're specifically talking about the Equality Act 2010. Is menopause a protected characteristic? No, it isn't. So it's not a protected characteristic like having impairment of sight or hearing, for example. There is a discussion going on at the moment. There is an all-party parliamentary group talking about whether menopause should become a protected characteristic in the workplace. So there have been quite a number of employment tribunals which talk about menopause. And for example, is menopause a disability? Should it be considered a disability? So at the moment, if people are looking for any form of redress through discrimination in the workplace, then obviously through the Equality Act, but through the protected characteristics of age, gender, and potentially disability. So if we think of the definition of disability, we're looking at something which lasts longer than 12 months. The average menopause lasts between 4 and 9 years. And we're also looking at something which can have an impact on a person's ability to carry out their day-to-day role. And so what most employment lawyers will talk about, and which I will share with you, is that menopause in itself is not a disability, but the symptoms of menopause can be disabling. And that's how we should be considering menopause in the workplace. Now, of course, not everybody is going to experience severe symptoms around menopause, and 20% of females who go through menopause will not experience any symptoms at all. They'll still go through it, but not experience symptoms. But that means 80% will experience symptoms, and 25% of that 80% will experience severe symptoms. And that's when we're looking for that help and support. So if we're considering that the menopause can last between 4 and 9 years, we're not talking about short-term support either. We are talking about long-term support for that individual. And during that time, they will generally find ways that they can help and support themselves. But in the meantime, they're going to need that time and space from work or within work to work out how they're actually going to be supported, which is where the educational process comes into. So legally, we're also looking at health and safety at work. So what we are looking to do is to make sure that the working environment doesn't make menopausal symptoms worse. So that can be the physical environment. So for example, if you are working with a uniform, you know, what is your uniform made of? How many changes of uniform have you got? Have you got access to washing facilities? If you're working in an office base, you know, how what is the temperature like within that particular area? So more the physical aspects of what we're doing. And of course, if you already have a risk assessment in relation to an existing health condition, for example, this might be an appropriate time to review that to see how menopausal symptoms sit against that risk assessment too. So economically, we as we've spoken about, we know that over 50% of the population are going to experience menopause. So how does that translate within your own organisation? So what are the demographics of your organisation that you will need to start to talk about it? But when we are considering talking to everybody about it, because menopause is everyone's business. So whether you're directly experiencing it, how are you going to support other people? And the other important aspect around menopause is the social aspect of it. So there is a lot of negative stereotyping around menopause. We hear on a daily basis around people who are experiencing being made a joke of, and being the butt of jokes, if you like. And, you know, for people experiencing that, then obviously that's harassment in the workplace under the legal side of it. But actually the right thing to do is to support that individual, because if we were talking that people were experiencing some of the comments and behaviour that they are experiencing around menopause, if that was a different protected characteristic, then I think the story would be very different on how those individuals are being dealt with. So culturally, we're looking at what our organisation thinks about menopause, how they're talking about menopause. Is menopause visible within your own organisation, for example? And we always put the challenge out to people to say, type menopause into your intranet, see what comes back, and see if you actually do get anything that comes back around menopause. So we've when we're talking about legislation, it's not, of course, all about legislation, and it's about legislation versus the right thing to do. And it is the right thing to do to talk about menopause because it is a diversity and inclusion issue. So if we want to be inclusive and fair and respectful within the organisations that we work in, then that's why we need to talk about menopause. So even though we have that protection through employee legislation, it should be the right thing to do. So I just wanted to share with you, when we work with organisations, we always give them the opportunity to take our free client survey. And our client survey asks 11 questions. And what we're trying to do is establish within that organisation a baseline for menopause. So what is that current conversation within your own organisation? And we teamed up with Manchester Metropolitan University, who prepared this summary for us. So you can see that within the client organisations that we've worked with, that 91% said there was little or no acknowledgement at work of menopause. So again, you know, reflect that back into your own organisation, and what kind of responses could you expect if you ask that question. So because there's no acknowledgement of menopause, and because it's not visible within those organisations, what people have felt the need to do is to hide their symptoms and to mask them. So for, you know, if somebody asks how you are, it's very rare that somebody is going to say, I'm menopausal and I'm suffering symptoms today, and it's a real challenge for me. And also you can see that because of that anxiety, and we can see that loss of confidence, then you will start to see how that's going to manifest itself in the workplace. And 70% talking about having no confidence to have a conversation. And you know, why don't people want to talk about it? You know, why have we still got this taboo and this stigma and this embarrassment? And it's because A lot of it is around what is the potential impact on me if I start talking about menopause at work. Are people going to think that I can't do my job anymore? Are people going to think that I'm incompetent? Am I going to miss out on promotion because somebody thinks I can't do my job because I'm menopausal? And nearly all of the respondents to our surveys talked about normalising menopause at work. So we think obviously menopause is really important, but we also think that you don't need to put it up in great big glitter ball lights that everybody needs to talk about it. But what we want to do is create this environment that if you do need to talk about it, that you feel confident to talk about it, that you feel safe to talk about it, that you can trust your line manager to have these conversations with your line manager. So that's the kind of normalising that we're talking about. And so I'll put the question back to you again about how within your own organisation are people being supported around menopause, and what does that support actually look like? So it's always worth having a review or an audit of what kind of support you're providing to individuals. One of the questions on our survey is, tell us a little bit more about menopause within your own organisation. And this is just an idea of some of the responses that we get back to, and they're obviously all anonymous, that we get back to our survey. And I just wanted to share some of those with you, and ask the question, if you were to ask that question within your own organisation, what kind of responses would you expect to get back? And you can see, and I'm not obviously going to go through all of this, but you can see that some of the things that I've spoken about, such as being treated as a joke and not getting support from line managers and feeling isolated and unsupported and not taken seriously, you can see how this story then starts to manifest itself. And so what we're trying to do is to say, yes, it can be challenging for individuals to go through menopause, but what we want to do is be able to keep those individuals in the workplace, because we want to keep their skill, we want to keep their talent. And how are we actually going to do that? So the other challenges that individuals face when they want to talk about menopause, and this is what people tell us, is that they don't feel confident to have a conversation with a male line manager. And I don't want to make this a gender issue, of course, but that is what people are saying back to us, is that they don't feel confident to have that conversation with a male line manager. But of course, a male line manager might have direct experience of menopause because they're in a relationship where somebody might be experiencing that, but they might have those skills to live and to be able to support that individual. And the other thing that comes back to us is that when line managers are younger and they are female, that they don't necessarily understand either. So sometimes that can be a barrier. And so if we can quote stories and about how people have had this real positive experience with their line manager, whoever their line manager may be, then that really helps other people to know that they can have that positive conversation, whoever their line manager is. So as I say, in your own organisation, what's your story around menopause? How do people talk about it? Is it visible? Is it part of normal conversation within your organisation? And when we're talking about what does menopause mean to you, that follows on about your individual story too, because just as menopause is individual to all of us, then your organisations are going to have your individual menopause story too. So I thought I would just go through some of the things that as employers you can do to support your menopausal employees. So one of in our survey, one of our other questions is around where do you seek support if you are going through menopause? And the biggest response that we get to that is friends and colleagues, and very few people seek out line managers or HR or occupational health. They're all looking to their friends and colleagues. So being able to have a support group where you can talk to somebody who gets it, who understands menopause, and you feel comfortable sharing that information can be a real huge support to individuals going through menopause. And this group can also be proactive as well. So that this group can also help in sharing stories and sharing best practice around menopause. If you've got health and wellbeing events, they can be involved in that, and they can also help to have conversations with line managers as well, who might not feel overly confident to be able to have a conversation around menopause. One of the other things that we found is really supportive for individuals as well are Menopause Champions. And we do a lot of work with groups from organisations who are sometimes already trained as mental health first aiders, for example. So they're already got those listening skills and want to be involved and voluntary within the organisation, and to upskill those mental health first aiders, mental health champions or wellbeing champions, and upskill them around menopause, because as I've said previously, there is an overlap certainly between mental health challenges, cognitive challenges around menopause and mental health itself. So we find that really works well too. All supervisors should know about menopause, and no ifs or buts, from our point of view, all supervisors should know about it. All supervisors should know the legal stance around menopause. They should know how to support individuals. They should know the support routes within their organisation. So in order to do that, then training is required for them to be able to have that level of knowledge, to be able to have that informed conversation. And I've spoken about an internal website, signposting, make sure it's easily accessible. We talked to a number of organisations that when you're talking about where is menopause, it's not always really visible for people to be able to access it too. So one of the other things that we have a really big conversation around when we're talking about menopause are about reasonable adjustments within the workplace. So what do those reasonable adjustments look like when we are talking about menopause? If you recall, I talked about a symptom checker. So as an individual, I'm identifying my symptoms and seeing how those symptoms cause me the challenges. So then we carry on that through to the regional adjustment passport. So how, as an individual, do my menopausal symptoms impact on my ability to carry out my role? So a reasonable adjustment passport, and sometimes it's called a wellness passport, allows the individual to say, this is me, these are my symptoms, this is how my symptoms impact on my ability to carry out my role. This is what a good day looks like. This is what a bad day looks like. So for some people going through menopause, because our hormones fluctuate, so our estrogen levels fluctuate as we go through menopause. So if our estrogen levels are fairly high, then our challenges might not be as great. But if our hormone levels are low, then we might be having significant challenges around it. So what the passport allows you to do is to describe what those days look like and what support you may require on a day when you're having those challenges. And because it's individual and it stays with that person, whether they change role or whether they change supervisor, then you can see how beneficial it can be to that individual, because you're not constantly having that same conversation trying to explain to others or to your manager what this actually feels like. And also within that, you can also some of the challenges managers talk to us about, for example, are around having a menopausal employee on the team, and sometimes that can have an impact on the rest of the members of the team. So if we're having this conversation about what menopause is and the impact of it, then as an individual, then I can say to my manager, I would like the rest of the team to know this and this, and I'm going to tell them about it. Or I would like you, my manager, to be able to explain this to other members of my team. But of course, you don't have to do any of those things, because of course you don't have to tell anybody at work that you are menopausal. But we actively encourage employees to do that, because the more that we can share the experiences that we're having, then hopefully the more that we can get that support in the workplace. We would also recommend that you review policies around all your policies around retention and recruitment, around absence management, around performance management, and is menopause visible within those policies? Do you have any menopause guidance? Because we don't advocate that you need to have a separate menopause policy, because everything that is applicable to menopause will be in a different policy. But having guidance, because it's usually a new conversation in the workplace and we're constantly talking to organisations who've never mentioned it before, so having guidance helps to set out the organisational view of menopause and also the stance that the organisation is taking and how the expectation is for that individual to support. So there is an opportunity for us to help you with menopause guidance as well, if that's something that you're looking to do. So I mentioned earlier on about that menopause being taken more seriously, and the lady you can see in the picture is called Carolyn Harris, and she is leading an all-party parliamentary group talking about menopause in healthcare, in work, and in education too. And so she very much is talking about the attitude towards it, about education around menopause. And I just wanted to share that with you because I think it's real clear evidence that menopause is being taken more seriously. So if organisations aren't already talking about it or aren't giving themselves up to talk about menopause, then perhaps now is the time to start looking at it. And for those of you who don't know, it is World Menopause Day on the 18th of October. So there should be quite a lot more in the media around menopause, so an opportunity there to start talking about it too. So I'm just going to leave you with that question as to why you're not talking about menopause, because obviously we don't see any reason why you wouldn't want to be talking about it. And then if you want any further information, then we would suggest that for medical matters that you go to the website My Menopause Doctor, the NICE guidelines, which I referenced before, what to expect when you go to your GP, and also CIPD have also got guidance around menopause, and we contributed to that guidance, which is why we recommend it. And of course ourselves here at Talking Menopause, where we can provide all of your wishes around menopause. And I think I shall hand back over to Amy, because I think I might have got the timing right.
Yeah, perfect, spot on. Right, something's happened to my view, bear with me 1 second, let's get you all back. Okay, good. So that was great, really informative. Thank you, Lynda. Lots of information for everyone to take in and take back to their organisations. So we'll just run through some of the questions in the chat. Sorry, I'm having a technical issue here. This never happens. 1 second. Oh, there we go. I've got them. So we have Susie's finished her lunch because she's back on screen, the lovely Susie. So Alison has asked, what about making mistakes as a result of menopause because of forgetting to do something? Male managers would want to discipline, not consider it, might be due to these symptoms.
Yeah, so and that is where we're talking about awareness, because the cognitive challenges that individuals face around menopause can be around memory lapse. It can be about making mistakes, even if you're doing check after check and writing list after list. And so the risk for managers, if they're not taking menopause seriously, is that, worst case scenario, they're going to be at an employment tribunal because they haven't taken into account those menopause issues. So we would say that if somebody is presenting, if this person has always been productive and then they start to behave in a different way, then there's normally a reason for that. And so when we're exploring around that reasons, then we're not going to jump straight into performance management. We're going to have a conversation with that person. And if we let that individual know that we're happy and confident to talk about menopause, we're not going to ask directly if somebody's menopausal, because obviously that isn't the right thing to do. But what we do want to do, as I said, is create that environment. So if I am experiencing that as an individual, and I suspect it is around menopause, I feel confident to have that conversation with you as a manager. And if I don't, where else can I go in the organisation to do that? Is there a women's network? Is there a menopause support group? Is there somebody else that I can go and talk to about these challenges that I'm facing? And so that would be what I would think would be the way forward.
Brilliant. Thanks, Lynda. Kimberly has said, I don't think many people will speak about menopause as employees. So how can management keep the menopause as a potential factor in mind when dealing with the poor performance mistakes and lack of concentration, etc.?
Yeah, so again, it's around this education process. It's about, as an organisation, that menopause is visible. So again, type in the internet, is menopause there? Is it included in? Have we got some guidance on menopause? What do we expect our managers to do? What can our employees expect back from us if we're going to support them going through menopause? What are the demographics of our organisation? And stories of how people have been supported is really important. And as senior leaders, it's almost like this pincer movement. So at this senior level, we are setting out our stall to say this is important to us. It's important for lots and lots of reasons. And at the lower end of the organisation, then we are raising awareness because it's on the ground. We know what the challenges are. So somewhere in the middle, we would expect that to meet. But if you have senior leaders who are happy to talk about menopause. So if you were a female leader and you were happy to talk about it because of your experience, or if you were a male leader and you were happy to talk about it because of a partner's experience, because you have female relatives, let's get that conversation going. And so it's a normal part of what we do, because if you come into work and say you're pregnant, nobody's going to roll their eyes, nobody's going to make a joke about it, nobody's going to say anything, are they? And so we should be able to come into work and be able to say, yes, I'm menopausal today, and I'm facing some of these challenges. Not like one of my colleagues who asked me how I was, and I went, Joe, thanks for asking, but today's not a good day because of my menopausal symptoms. To which he went, why are you telling me that? Well, because that's the truth, and that's what's actually happening. And if you've lost your confidence and self-esteem, and you're not feeling good about yourself, and you haven't slept, and it is really difficult to be upfront and sort of open about what's going on. But if we can create that environment where our managers are trained, they understand it, where we've got that support group, where we've got Menopause Champions, then we can create that environment where it's okay to talk about menopause. The challenges might still be there, but we're okay to talk about them because we know we're not going to be penalised for speaking up.
Brilliant, thank you. And Elaine said, as a non-symptomatic woman, do menopause symptoms tend to be cyclical, i.e. similar to menstruation, or are the symptoms non-regular, or does it vary?
There is no typical menopause, because all of us are different, and we're all individual. And so what can happen with menopausal symptoms is, because our hormones fluctuate, and even after menopause there is still, there can still be some fluctuation, then you can still experience some symptoms, but some months symptoms might be A, B, and C, and another month there might be D, E, and F, but over time we can start to understand what they are, and also what we do can impact on our symptoms as well. So what we eat, for example, alcohol can have an impact on our symptoms, which, sorry everybody, but it's true. And the way we deal with sugar can also have an impact on us as well, because the way insulin works. So it's keeping we talk about keeping a symptom diary, but keeping a food diary to try and understand, if you eat or drink certain things, whether that has an impact on your symptoms as well. So yes, they do. They do change over time, and there are some people who still have hot flushes in their 90s, but hopefully most people don't. But then there's other people who've never had a hot flush in their life, so that's a huge variance. And of course within different cultures as well, how people talk about it. There isn't always that conversation. But for most people go through menopause, the physical and the psychological symptoms are pretty even in the amount that they actually have. But sometimes it's how our own experiences and where we are that also impact on how we manage those symptoms too.
Lovely, thank you. And Louisa said, is it advisable to have the NICE guideline and information directing female employers to the Balance app and the Louise Newson website and information, etc., to support employees when they are struggling and they aren't sure where to go for factual or helpful information?
Yeah, because I'm sure that all of you put something into Google and lots of things come out, and how many websites can you actually trust and how much information. So because of our relationship with Louise, for example, that's why we would direct you to that evidence-based website, because you can go, it's like with everything, Dr. Google, isn't it? You can go around in circles with looking at lots of things. So if you go to one place where all that information is, then that's going to help, I think, just to keep to one information. So to have those resources internally on your internet or on a website there, I would recommend that, because that's resources that are available to individuals.
Great. And Susie, again, I think this is one that you might be able to connect with Susie after the call, but she said really helpful information. Thank you for the info. With a friend, we are in the process of launching a parent hub in Mid-Devon called Supportive, and an important element of that will be a menopause group, a place to talk and normalise the issues associated with it. Would you be able to support us with an information via Zoom or face-to-face for that group at some point in the future, please?
I would be delighted to.
Lovely. You can obviously connect on LinkedIn. I'm just keeping an eye on the time. We're okay. And
thank you.
Added, it sounds essential to build a trust culture aside from management procedures. How can that be promoted even more important during COVID, research suggests?
Yeah, and it's interesting, the COVID one, because the more control we have over our working environment, then the more control we can normally exert over our symptoms. So if we're thinking, we can start at a different time, or we can finish work at a different time, we can sit in our pajamas if we want, we can have our cameras off. That that can give us more control over how we manage those symptoms. And just take me back to the question, because I've just had a moment there.
I've scrolled
this is in action now. Menopause in action.
That's okay, don't worry. It sounds essential to build a culture aside from the management procedures. How can that be promoted even more during COVID research?
Yeah, so to us, it is about raising awareness. It's about having that visibility around menopause. It's about knowing that you can ask for help if you need it. And as I say, during COVID, there has been so much support for people around mental health. There's been so much support around health and well-being. And so this is a real opportunity, we think, to get menopause in there as well.
Great, thank you. There are a lot of people requesting the slides. Lynda has kindly suggested that I will send out an email to everybody after the call, and there will be some links on there. We can't actually share the slides, but if there's any kind of information points or links, I can include them. Lynda can forward them to me, and I can include them on the email that I'm going to send out to everybody. So yeah, just it's a good time to kind of wrap up. So thank you everyone for attending. It's been a great session. Just a quick reminder to those that haven't yet joined the Guilds app, please feel free. I'll add the link to that onto the email that I send out after the call. I'll also pop a post on LinkedIn. If you can share, it just raises our brand awareness, because we don't charge for these events, which would be great. And just a final reminder of our sister companies, FD Recruit and Accountancy Recruit, along with HR Recruit. Obviously, if anybody is recruiting, please don't hesitate to give us a call.